Welcome back, everyone. Previously, I showed some of the sketch ideas that I captured on paper, regardless of how rough they look. And one of them happened to be that wizard sketch, which you see right here. This one is just an idea about a mage that he's performing some kind of magic, and that little magical thing that he's doing is what's lighting up the scene. So I decided to take that sketch and actually run it through a design pipeline. And in this video, I'm going to actually be starting with the process of doing the thumbnails, ending with something around over 60 different thumbnail ideas. Now, and once I get through this process, I'm gonna go ahead and eventually, when I have the time, to actually design these characters using my thumbnail ideas. All right, so let's get started. The first few designs you're gonna do, they're just gonna look terrible. It's because you're actually just warming up, so don't beat yourself over it. Understand it's gonna suck, and it's kind of like warming up at the gym. You start by working out and it feels horrible, and then when you warm up, you feel a whole lot better, and that's when you really perform really well. And it's the same idea when you're sketching. And on top of that, it's something you're gonna have to remind yourself over and over, because you will definitely feel discouraged many more times than you would actually feel encouraged. So what you're seeing before you, I started the first thumbnail using a pencil, a basic HB2 pencil, and then I went over it with an ebony pencil. And the idea is to just take any sort of, so in this case, because I'm designing wizards, any idea that I have, these generic ideas in my head about what wizards look like, basically, I'm just putting it down quickly on paper. Well, I shouldn't say quickly, it's more like to the best of my ability. I don't like to use that. I don't want to use that word, because then what's going to happen is I was taught to draw really, really quickly in these, like, don't spend too much time on a thumbnail. But the problem with that, if you're not that experienced, then you should spend time on your thumbnails. I mean, you're not working for a company, and you're not, if it's not like you're at a major AAA studio where you have the pressure to actually produce. I mean, by then you're going to be skilled enough to actually rush through your work. But when you're learning like me, it's just, you know what, if it's going to take you several more days to work on these thumbnails, why not? So typical Gandalf looking wizards, with their cane, their garment, their pointy hat, multiple layers of clothing, just because it looks cool. Anytime you layer something, it looks more attractive than a single layer. So I'll just take this moment to actually talk about, as I'm sketching these thumbnails, there's a lot that's going on in my head. So there are times where I'm thinking about simply balancing the character. Does the character look like it's actually standing, or it's about to tip over or slide off the paper, versus, oh, that character looks grounded, it's actually standing on a surface. That's one of the things that goes through my head. Or sometimes I just think about structure, where things are connected, and then I try to layer some sort of design element on top of that, you could say, mannequin. Oh, as you can see right here, I'm adding a sword for that wizard, because the point of thumbnails is to explore ideas. So, well, yeah, that's just one of the things you can gain from doing thumbnails. So in this case, I don't want to just do the typical, there's the wizard with his staff over and over, because that defeats the purpose of, pushing my design skills. Instead, why don't I try a wizard that carries swords? Why not a wizard that is very muscular and pretty much a hybrid of a barbarian and a wizard? Or a wizard that's pretty much a joker, and all he does is joke. Like, he's got like a just-like personality, but he's also very powerful due to his magical abilities. And you don't have to settle for one single thumbnail. A lot of times, at least for me, I'll design all these thumbnails, and pick certain elements, for example, oh, I really like that staff, or I really like that pose from this thumbnail, or I really like that combination of ideas I put in this one, and take these elements and add them into the final design. And eventually, potentially, I should say, that it's actually going to work out, or at least get me closer to something that's going to work for me. And I'm definitely a big believer when it comes to the more you push your art, the more you're going to move to the next level. So even though these are just thumbnails and they're just meant for me to use for the actual designs, I still try to push them. I still try to improve upon them. So I'm not afraid to say, yeah, I really did try and they didn't turn out too well, versus, some people would be like, oh, they're just thumbnails, that's why I don't care how bad they look. It's like, well, I personally do care, because if I could control my thumbnails, these little small scale images where I'm designing, thinking about balance, thinking about anatomy, thinking about the gear these characters are wearing, their magical abilities, where the light is coming and how it's lighting every single one of them. That's training my brain so that eventually when I design these characters, they're going to look really good at a very early stage. And if you want a good example of that, just look up Feng Zhu on YouTube. You'll see what I mean. That guy puts 2 lines down and it looks phenomenal. I could say that about Kapinski as well. My favorite character artist of all time, really. If you notice, I keep making one of their hands, at least one of their hands, where they're performing some kind of magical spell. So I don't want it to be that typical, there's just fire coming out of his hand or just some sort of lightning energy. In this particular one, I'm trying to actually make it so that some other element is coming out of, it's almost like he's summoning something out of his hand. In this case, it's some type of bird, magical bird. I don't have one way to work on these designs, so it really just comes down to what I feel in the moment. Sometimes I just feel like scribbling lines and then see shapes through those scribbles, basically chaos to control type of method. Sometimes I think about nothing but structure, where I'm trying to design the underlying anatomy and then dressing it up. And you'll see as this video continues, I'm using different mediums to see how they behave, which affects how I actually start designing. If that makes sense. And don't be afraid to erase. Like, as you can see, I have trouble controlling this thumbnail right here. It just wasn't working out. That's normal. Not everything you're going to do is going to be a home run, but I would suggest try to at least turn it into something that's reasonable, that it's kind of like, okay, I can live with this one. It's acceptable. It's somewhat work, versus just giving up on it and moving on. Like, that pose kind of works for me. Oh, I skipped that part, which you didn't see. I went back basically to start labeling the designs that I did in numbers, so that when I look back, I actually can tell, hey, look how many designs I actually did. I mean, how many thumbnails I did for my designs. And also, it's easier to reference them, especially if I have to communicate with somebody about this. Like, I like, the staff of number 10, I like the pose of number 13, and so on and so forth. But also, it just makes me feel good because I can see what I produced. Here I switched to using a Conte pencil. It's similar, if not the same thing that Michelangelo was using. And the reason I'm doing that, because I don't want to be bored. Because sometimes you're drawing, and because it's so frustrating and it's so hard, using the same medium just doesn't feel stimulating enough. So in this case, I decided, let's try Conte for the first layer and then try to design over it using pencil. In this particular wizard that you're looking at, he's more of a barbarian type of wizard, and I really like this idea because, like, how often do you see some wizard that looks like Arnold Schwarzenegger, yet he can do crazy magical things? And as far as poses go, I'm not actually looking up poses or anything particular at this stage. A lot of times I'm just designing what's, based on what's in my head. I might look at certain images, for example, for fabrics or belts or weapons or different body types, but nothing specific to my actual thumbnail design. And I rather do the design first, and later on, when I'm happy with my thumbnail, or should I say a combination of thumbnails, and there's that certain look and certain pose and certain style I'm going for, that's when I'm going to go get more reference to actually support my design decisions. I mean, that's just how I like to do it. I also don't want to be restricted by anything. If I ever have to design on a napkin, using a pencil or a pen and a napkin on a napkin surface, I just want to be able to actually do that. That little shadow that I'm adding is just to indicate that character is grounded. I like the one at the very right, you could tell he's standing right on the ground, and the one next to it, he's not on the ground, he's actually floating using his magical abilities. Again, it's just design exploration. I'm trying to push what I have that's in my head already and start discovering ideas that I never would have thought before. Like in this case, he's summoning a cobra out of his hand, and that's clearly a wizard you don't want to mess with. And his sword indicates most likely he has the ability to also fight. And he has got a massive staff. Definitely want to be nice to that guy. And one thing comes to mind right now, I'm thinking some of you might be wondering, why don't I do this on a tablet? Why don't I do it like everybody else using a tablet and Photoshop? And I have those things. It's just I'm purposely avoiding it because I believe this, and that's my personal belief, you really learn how to draw and how to paint and how to design when you actually do it on paper, because you can't take shortcuts, you can't cheat, you can't use any type of digital hacks. If you screw up a drawing, then that's it. That drawing, you're either going to have to work really hard to try to rescue it, or you're going to have to start all over. Therefore, you're actually going to build your skills up properly. So if I'm doing this, say like for years, and I get really good at, taking design ideas that I write down to eventually designing them through thumbnails to the final design, and eventually painting them in whichever medium that I want to work with, for example, oils or gouache, and eventually say like I want to do transition into the digital side, then my skills and your skills would be on steroids when you think about it, because you're going to be able to do what you're really good at 1,000 times faster. And if you think about it, not too many people actually do it traditionally these days. So I think in a way, it's sad that this type of art is actually dying. And if you look at the veterans that are working in the video game and film industry, the ones that are really, really good at what they do, generally speaking, they come from a traditional background. But then again, that's just my opinion. You could do whatever you want. What I like about using Conte, it's hard to add details, but it gives me that nice good feeling. It's like, oh, I feel good about that pose, about that look. And then I'm able to go over it with a pencil and start actually trying to make sense out of those shapes, I should say. When you're actually designing when you're actually going through creating all these thumbnails and you're exploring different poses, you're exploring different styles of drawing a certain character, so in this case a wizard, that's training your thinking ability, your creative ability. But at the same time, as you can see, I'm pushing every single character to the best of my ability. That's actually training my illustration skills, and I believe that's the best combination, is being really good at thinking about original ideas, coming up with original ideas, but also really good at actually executing those ideas into beautiful, readable illustrations that, for example, if a 3D artist looks at, it inspires them so much and they're able to work with it effortlessly because you thought about pretty much all the design challenges. And to me, that's a true artist. Somebody, not only can they draw, do beautiful illustrations, but they can also think very deeply and create enormous amounts of version. And from that, coming up with iconic characters and environments that possibly will become timeless. Yeah, I was thinking about lighting up his sword. I just think it's cool that, okay, so like he's a wizard and he's adding spells to his sword so that when he's actually playing with that sword or swinging that sword, you're seeing a whole bunch of visual effects coming out of it. I don't know, it just looks cool. I like it. For the previous thumbnail that I just did, his garment or rope that's hanging on the floor, those little heads that are sticking out, I was just thinking the garment ends are kind of like transitioning into snakes. I just thought that's another cool idea. Sometimes I write my own notes. So, for example, bird feathers floating from magic. So the idea is that his body is just from his costume, from his shoulders, as he's walking or as he's standing still. These like raven feathers or crow feathers are just projecting from him and floating off. I just thought that's cool instead of fire or just light beaming out of him. It's like, say, like he's like a really dark wizard. Why not these crow feathers just like coming off his body? And in a way, that's his signature. It's kind of like Lilith from Diablo 4. Like she's got these blood petals. Wherever she goes, she leaves them behind. But in this case, I was thinking, why not crow feathers? And another reason I write my own notes is because sometimes when I'm drawing, doesn't actually make it's just not clear. So I make that note so that if I come back and when I want to actually use those elements, I'll be able to look at it and be like, oh, that's what I was thinking and that's what I was trying to design, instead of, well, I forgot what I was doing here, so let's move on. Basically, that if that idea was golden, it was just really good, it would just vanish if I don't actually make notes, because if I don't understand it, who would, considering they're my designs? Here I'm using charcoal pencil. Just once again, I'm trying different mediums for the sake of keeping the fun energy going. It kind of looks like a chalk brush if you're using Photoshop. The only difference is whatever you put down, that's it. You're gonna have to work with it, and also if you touch it, you're gonna smudge the heck out of it. So I advise you to be very careful when you're using chalk on paper when it's not meant for paper. And this pencil, same thing, is just a different type of chalk, super dark. And that's what I really like about it. The idea is to just capture the overall figure, the silhouette, and some sort of design that actually reads enough so that I can look at it and decide, do I want to work with it later on or just move on? for this particular design. For this thumbnail, I was trying to also design wings, but because my space is so limited, I just indicate wings. So if I actually want to add wings later on, I'm going to have to think about my spacing. Yeah, I forgot to number them, I guess. So I just want to go ahead and do that, update it. And as you can see, I'm also putting a sheet under my drawing hand so that, I mean, I usually do that for good practice because I don't like smudging. But in this case, because I'm using charcoal on printer paper, which is not a good idea. So you really got to be careful or else you're going to smudge it and you will just ruin your little designs that you put down. I like this one. It turned out okay to the point I actually want to work with it later on when I'm designing my final wizards. He's pretty much like a dark warlock. He just has a really dark presence to him. Everything he wears is black. He's got the previous, the crow's or raven feathers just perspirating from his body, leaving his mark, and just like dark energies projecting out of his body, his hands. Sometimes I also leave more notes because it's an indication that it's a design that I want to work with later on, not necessarily I don't understand what's going on with what I put down. Yeah, some type of wings for this one, some skulls on the ground, trying to give them a little bit of an environment, a little bit of a storytelling, just because I had the space for it and I don't want to leave it empty. That's another thing I think about. It's whatever space I have left on the paper, I try to fill it up accordingly. One, it looks really good for presentation, even though it's not for anybody but me, but still, it's just good practice. And two, it forces you to actually think. You've got to use that space and you've got to come up with something that would actually suit that space. That's another challenge. That's another design challenge that you can be mindful of. You can see those little dots just like spreading everywhere. That's from the charcoal breaking. But anyway, that's what happens when you're using charcoal on printer paper. Here I tried using a calligraphy paper with a dip pen. I don't know what it is about it. Maybe I haven't played with it enough, but this just drove me nuts. I would put down a few lines and right away the ink would dry up. Again, I would have to dip it again, and come back, dip it again and come back, dip it again and come back. And it was really frustrating. So I did about like 4 of them, I think. And then I just stopped using it, 4 or 5 of them, something like that. I don't know. Maybe it was the type of ink, or maybe it was at the angle I was holding the dip pen. Not sure. Maybe it was the paper that was absorbing too much of the ink out of the nib. But I found this was restricting me because I was trying to think and I'm trying to freely explore, but as I'm doing that, it would break my thinking pattern because I had to, I can't continue this thought process because I have to go back and add more ink. Here I'm using walnut ink, but I don't know, maybe next time I'll try it on printer paper, which I have in the past, and it would take a lot longer for the ink to dry, so you wouldn't have to go back and dip every few seconds. And they're a little tricky. You can only go in one direction, so you can never push against the nib. It's like painting. You never want to push against your brush. I forgot what they're called. So basically the brush, the way it's made, you can only go in the opposite direction to keep your brush from breaking and getting damaged. It's the same thing with these dip pens. So sometimes naturally I want to go in every direction because I'm just used to doing that with a pencil. With these, no, you're going to have to slow down a bit, think more about the way this medium behaves. And as you can see, these designs look terrible. It's because I'm using something that I wasn't comfortable with. So that's normal too when you're switching different types of mediums, especially the ones that you're not comfortable with, that you're not used to using. It will hinder your skills temporarily until you get really comfortable with that medium, or you just choose to give that medium up. Oh, here, this was just a terrible idea. So I put the Conte down and I went over it with the walnut ink and it just wouldn't flow. Then I switched to black ink and it would flow a little bit better. Nevertheless, it still drove me nuts. See, as you can see, like it just dries up really quickly and everything just looks flat. Like there's no dimension. Oh, here I took one of my, I don't know what they're called, marker pens or whatever. I mean, they're really cool to explore with, but in this case, mine was all dried up and old. So either big blobs would come out or it would just be dry. And then I switched to this, I don't know what this one is called. Anyway, I'm sure if you look up Karl Kopinski, he uses that all the time. I don't like how that worked out, so I just completely got rid of it. I switched over to one of my pens, and then I decided to work with that. Here I'm thinking more of the industrial style of working with characters. So I'm trying to lay the structure, the hip to the shoulder relation, balancing the character, and hopefully design something that is somewhat interesting.
This is another thumbnail that I did that I actually want to take and eventually design it out. The reason I like this one because this one came out really cool because it's a wizard, but he's also a jester. So he's got that clown looking outfit, full, like, lots of colors. He's full of tricks. He can, he could just do a whole bunch of tricks with his body, making jokes and tricking you. But at the same time, he's a wizard, So the indication of that staff and what he's doing with his hand, those magical things that are beaming out of his hand. I just thought that's a cool idea. I've never seen a like wizard before. That's what I mean about discovering original ideas. It really just comes from doing a lot of these thumbnails. I know they're not easy, but they're definitely worth it. Oh, his left arm, it looks like it's in two poses. It's because sometimes I would do one pose and it doesn't work out, so I would just draw the next one. And in this case, because I'm using a pen and I can't erase it, so I just leave it in. And that's normal. I mean, like I said, you're not going to hit a home run every single time in anything you do. Sometimes I bring in some color into my thumbnails because the idea is so vivid in my head. I go ahead and color that quickly so that once again, if I actually decide to work with it, it's there for me to reference. That's actually supposed to be a shield on his back. Same thing with the hands. As you can see, I did it in two different poses because the first one just wasn't working out. So, okay, all right, just move on. Yeah, sometimes you'll see I'm laying the overall generic muscles and then I'm trying to layer the clothing patterns that the character is actually wearing. Yeah, there's that note. Oh, another cool idea is if you're just stuck, just think of generic shapes. So here I was using triangles and squares and I was mixing them so that there's some sort of a design language to base my thumbnail off. I hope you're getting the picture. A lot of what I'm using are tools that I've been able to learn over years to come, and I use what I feel I need to use in the moment, basically. If I'm stuck, I switch my method, and I find one that works in that point in time, and I stick to it until I'm tired of it. And then I go back to my toolbox, which is my head, and then I use something else. I think like using this pen on a printer paper would have worked much better than on this calligraphy paper. But since I already started, I didn't want to just throw it out. Like, might as well finish it. And to be honest, I actually captured some decent ideas, like the wizard that I really like. Yeah, as you can see, using pen on a printer paper, it just looks better than that calligraphy page you were seeing previously. That's another thing, when you're actually exploring, you're trying different combinations out, you start discovering what really works, at least for you, and eventually you only do the things that really work instead of the things that don't work. And that really just comes from experience. And unfortunately, there aren't too much information on these things, because just about everything you see on the internet now, it has to do with using Photoshop and sometimes Painter, Corel Painter. Oh yeah, in this sheet right here, I start transitioning from just doing male wizards. So I guess they're called warlocks. So that's equivalent to female witch. So I switched to why not do some female wizards or witches? Anyway, you get the idea. Here I went back to pencil and just because I felt like it, and I'm gonna go over it with a pen. Basically, I'm gonna lay down the structure and then I'll try to design the details using a pen. Doesn't mean it's gonna look good, but I'll try. Or I should say, I tried. She's kind of like wearing that bird wings type of helmet. Maybe it helps her with her magical powers. She's got a whole bunch of gear on her, around her waist, shoulder. She looks like she has potential. And here, I guess, I don't know, I just feel like going back to pencil and working with pencil a bit before finishing this character using a pen. With the staff, I'm trying to actually design it as straight as possible. I don't like wonky looking staffs. That's just my personal design preference. But the reason mine look a bit wonky is because I have trouble controlling my hand to draw perfectly straight lines, basically dragging my hand down using my shoulder. Now here I was just struggling with the pose, trying to just capture some type of dynamic female pose. But I mean, that's the point of learning, really. You're gonna do things and sometimes they're gonna work straight off the bat and sometimes you're gonna have to do them over and over. But at the end, I mean, just like the Bible says, as you sow, so shall you also reap. So you really get what you put in.
And there you go. It's starting to somewhat work. I was thinking for this one, like she has so much hair and she has these really cool thick braids, basically from thick to thin braids, all pushed back and just hanging on her shoulders, I guess. And as she moves, all the braids and her hair just kind of moves with it. I don't know. It just looks really cool. She looks cool and she looks like she could handle herself considering she has gear. Oh, those little things that I'm adding on her leg, they're supposed to be like flower patterns. So basically a combination of she can do magic, she can fight, she can hunt. At the same time, she's a girl. So she's got those flower patterns where she's got the feministic quality, like that female quality in her, that, you know, that soft quality. But at the same time, she's very dangerous. Here again, I made notes because the designs, I mean, those don't really look like flowers, but in my head, that's what I want to add. So I put that in because I know she's actually one of the designs that I actually want to design later on when I'm finalizing these things, when I have time. And in contrast, the one right next to it looks terrible. As you can see, I have to work with the space that I have. And in this case, it's not much. I'm either going to design a really thin, stick-looking figure, or I'm going to shrink down the design and try to fit one that actually somewhat reads. Yeah, the head placement just wasn't working with that body, so I decided to just erase that and reposition her head. Her chest just looks weird. It doesn't work. Her legs look too short. I would prefer longer legs. Here, instead of actually redrawing that figure, I just erased it a bit. I decided I'll try to fix that pose while I'm designing. Here it looks a little bit better. She got longer legs, thinner upper body. Her chest look like they're in a better position. She looks like she has some muscle on her body, and she looks like some type of a gladiator fighter. But again, she's like a wizard / witch type of character. And that's supposed to be a shield on her back. I guess those are spears. Something, some type of, you know, she's carrying multiple weapons. Once again, clearly, you don't want to mess with her. Yeah, here I'm switching back to like an industrial design type of method because that, you know, that's what felt good to me at that time. The pose is starting to somewhat make sense. One of the things that I always try to figure out, regardless of how bad each thumbnail are, it's the way the character is lit. Where's the light coming from and how is it lighting the character? That doesn't mean I'm able to capture it, but it's something I'm very conscious of.
Yeah, this one was a huge struggle because, once I wrote magical tattoo patterns so that I could remind myself later on, I realized, that limits my space in an awkward position. So I try to use the magical tattoo patterns text as like a resting place basically for the character. Yeah, as you can see, at least the 2 different versions that I drew, or 3 different versions, neither of them worked out. So I just, erased it a bit and went straight into just, let's design this out, shrunk the design down so that now I have, I guess, more space to work from. And here's the last one, last but not least. Yeah, this one, she's more creepy. She's got this fabric on her face, so you can't really tell what she looks like. Her body looks good, but her face is covered, so it's like, how hideous are you that you're covering your face? I don't know, just she's got that witch vibe to her, mixture of beauty and ugliness. Well, there you have it. My 63 different thumbnails that I produced about wizards. So male wizards and female witches or wizards, warlocks, whatever. You get the point. People with magic, different character variations, different poses, and I gotta go back to my previous designs that I'm working on, the Diablo 3 challenge that I was doing. Once that's done, I don't know, when I have time, I'll come back and actually design these characters. Anyway, if you made it this far into the video and you really like my content so far, I would really appreciate it if you hit the like button and help this little channel grow. Thanks for your time, and hopefully see you soon.